Welcome to the OJP Financial Management Virtual Seminar, or FMVS, a training series to help grantees effectively manage their federal awards. My name is Jamil Evans, and welcome to Session 3, Successfully Managing Your Grant Award through Understanding Classifications, Standards, and Types of Costs, and Preventing Fraud, Waste, and Abuse. We're so glad you can join us today. This session will cover an array of pre-award topics to help grantees successfully manage their grant award. And our learning objectives for today is to gain a basic understanding of OJP, the federal budget process, the essentials of laws and regulations outlining 2 CFR that pertain to the early phases of the grant cycle, learn to apply cost principles across different budget categories, and learn to access various training and technical assistance materials developed by OJP TFSC to help grantees effectively manage their grant award. Before we get started, today we do have captions and Spanish interpretation available, and you can enable the live caption feature by clicking on the live transcript up arrow and clicking on subtitles. Spanish interpretation is available by clicking the globe icon on the bottom of your screen and selecting Spanish. If activated, you will hear the Spanish audio at 80% and English audio at 20%. You can turn off your English channel by selecting the mute original audio. Then you only hear the Spanish channel. So before we get started, if you are experiencing any technical issues during this webinar, please let me know in the chat box. So let's go over a couple of Zoom tips. On the bottom left-hand side of your screen, you see a microphone icon. This is where you can adjust your audio options, where you can mute and unmute yourself. And if you're not speaking today, please ensure you mute yourself just to avoid any background noise or any interruptions. To the right of the microphone icon, you'll see a video icon. This is where you can adjust your video options and start and stop your video. To the right of those icons, you see your chat icon, and this is where we'll communicate with everyone on the platform today. So type in the chat box the last thing you had for breakfast, just to see if it's working for everyone. And while you're doing that, please keep in mind when typing in the chat box, the default setting is to message everyone. If you need to send a message privately, select the drop-down, choose your recipient, and compose your message. And I see we got a bunch of messages coming in now. Great. On the top right-hand side of your screen, you can change your viewing experience. You can go with speaker view, where you can see who's speaking at that time, or you can go with grid view. Finally, it is my pleasure to introduce our instructors for today. First, we'll have Crystal McNeil-Wright. Crystal is the Associate CFO for the Grants Financial Management Division in the Office for Justice Programs. She brings more than 30 years of leadership and management experience in accounting and finance, both from the public and private sectors. We'll also have Russ Bermejo. Russ is a Senior Training and Technical Assistance Specialist for the OJP TFSC. Russ brings over 10 years of experience with projects serving children and families affected by child maltreatment and substance use disorders. We'll also have Kaylana Gates. Kaylana is the Senior Training Operations Specialist for the OJP TFSC. Also joining us today is Darrell Acevedo. Darrell is the Financial Specialist for the OJP TFSC and a native to Puerto Rico. Also joining us today is Francis Mendez. Francis is the Project Director for the OJP TFSC, bringing 25 years of experience in justice and victim services programs, financial management, training, and technical assistance. Also joining us today is Carlin Hertz. Carlin is a financial specialist for the OJP TFSC, serving the American Samoa, Northern Mariana Islands, Guam, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Last and certainly not least, we'll have Celine Avals. Celine is a financial specialist for the OJP, TFSC, and brings more than 15 years of management and experience in accounting and finance, both from the private and public sectors. So, without further ado, I'll pass it over to Crystal McNeil-Wright. Crystal, take it away.
Thank you, Jamil. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Welcome. This is the welcome. As Jamil said, I am the Associate CFO of the Grants Financial Management Division. So very happy to have you here. I am here along with some of my staff members who are also here to assist in this presentation to answer any questions that you may have should any of that come up. But thank you so much again for joining us for session 3. So we are just over halfway there, and we will be completing within the next week or so. So for today, what we're going to be discussing, we'll start off with our grantee engagement activity. As you know, this is our opportunity to just kind of break the ice a little bit, start off with an engagement activity to get us moving, get us thinking, and then we'll move into our first presentation, classification, standards, and types of cost. That will be followed by a learning activity. So here we'll learn about all the different types of costs that would be for your grant. Next, we'll move into a presentation on fraud, waste, and abuse. Of course, we all know what that is. We definitely try to avoid it, and we'll do a learning activity after that. Then we'll go ahead and have an overall Q&A and discussion based on those learning activities, and then we'll discuss resources, next steps, and closing. So as a reminder, again, this is session 3. Today is February 15th, and we will be going through, again, classification standards, types of costs, fraud, waste, and abuse, and then the resources that are available to you through the learning management system is where you will go in and find other resources there on unallowable cost, allowable cost, and then preventing fraud, waste, and abuse. Make sure you're reviewing those resources, taking those knowledge checks, just so we can get through this session and ensure that you are have the knowledge that you need to effectively manage your grant. And of course, you can see there session 4 and 5 will come soon after. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Russ and I believe Kaylana, and they're going to go through the first grantee engagement activity. Enjoy, guys.
Thank you, Crystal. And hello, good afternoon. Buenas tardes, alofa, and half a day. Welcome to session 3, and I want to invite my colleague, Kaylana Gates, and we have a few questions for you today. So if you have your phone, please scan the QR code or go to menti.com and enter the numeric code there so you can participate in 3 questions I think we have for today. Kaylana, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yep. Awesome. Okay. So, Kaylana, as I'm changing the screens here, tell us what you do for the TFC, and have you had a chance to visit any of the territories?
Yeah, so I do operations for TFSC. So I have this running joke with my supervisor that trying to explain what I actually do is really hard because it's a lot of things. But I also have been helping Nicole with financial management things for the U.S. Virgin Islands. So I was able to go to St. Croix and visit some of our grantees there.
Yep. This is what you need to know about Kaylana. A lot of important work. And helps us do what we do. So thank you for everything. Okay, so here we go. Yep, absolutely. Kaylana, you want to ask the first question here?
Yeah, let's do it. All right, so you have one day off for yourself. Where do you go locally and what do you do?
This is a question that we ask when we actually arrive on site is, where should we go when we're off at the end of the day? Or do you have any suggestions for us to visit? So please, if you can, put this in the chat put this in the chat or go ahead and, oh, what is going on here? Why is it not showing? Are you able to see it?
We can't see the answers, no.
Oh my goodness, what is
Oh.
going on here? I tell you what, I don't know what's going on with the technology today. I can't see the answers here. Hold on.
It's only not working because we want it to work.
Oh my goodness. Do you see the Mentimeter though?
Mm-hmm.
Why is it not showing? Well, I tell you what, if you can put it in the chat. So if you answered, the 50 of you who answered on the Mentimeter, let's go ahead and put that in the chat. We'll see if the Mentimeter cooperates in the next one. So go ahead and put that in the chat. Let's take a look at that. Downhill skiing. Okay.
Berry picking or fishing? Oh, that sounds amazing.
Yeah. Luis,
Visit a winery. Somebody is on my level. That's what I also like to do.
Yeah. I was just going to acknowledge Luis. I know that she's probably in a beautiful part of the country. So yeah, that berry picking sounds fabulous. Caitlin, thank you for beach and hiking trails. Angela for ocean. Yep. Jaime says he's going to go back to sleep. Okay. Thanks everyone for adjusting there. I'm not sure why Mentimeter is not cooperating today. Normally show up. So let's see if the next question. But yes, if we ever visit you on island, please let us know where we should go. And we usually try to go to all the recommended sites. Here you go. Next question.
So what do you love most about your job?
Yeah. And again, if you could put that in the chat. And we'll just read some of these off. Tara, helping youth. Tracy, making an impact in the community. Thank you.
Oh, data. I love,
Yeah.
I used to call myself a big data nerd, so I totally get that.
Yep. Thank you, everyone. Educating people. Louise, thank you for serving the tribal communities, helping awesome staff. Thanks, Angela. Yeah.
There's a couple people who say the people they work with are acknowledging their staff members, so that's always good. That's one of my favorite things about my job too, is all of the lovely people I get to work with.
Yeah, I feel the same way about you, Keilana. Thank you. There's always a challenge. Yep. Networking. Thank you, everyone. Okay, let's do the last question. I think it's the last question.
So what training topics related to financial grants management would be helpful to your organization or team right now? And you can go ahead and put it in the chat because it looks like it's also not showing up again. And you can have more than one answer. Of course, there's always, in this line of work, there's always challenges, multiple challenges across different areas. So,
yeah. We love asking this question because it's helped us develop content and focus a lot of our TTA. And so we've heard over and over again of the importance of sub-recipient monitoring, and that is one of our primary focus, this year. Unallowable cost. That's come up many times. Procurement. So please put that in the chat. We're always interested to hear what those are.
We have 3 people talking about grant writing. So maybe we can write that down and focus on that next.
Yep. Satisfying special conditions. Allowable and unallowable costs. Thanks, Tara. Brandy, honestly, everything. Okay. Yes. And Brandy, I'd encourage you again to check out our website. We have a lot of stuff there. So if you're interested in everything, there's a good chance we developed a guide sheet, a job aid checklist, maybe even a short video on that. So please check it out. I think, yep. Thanks, Shelley. Thanks, Dawn. I think that's it. Ilana, thanks for your help here. And again, apologies for the Mentimeter. I don't know what happened there today. Let's go back to, yep. Let's go back to our presentation, and I'm ready to turn this over to our colleague, Sorel Acevedo, and he's going to talk about classification standards and types of cost. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thank you, Russ. Before I start, I want to remind people who may want to switch over to Spanish that they can do it if they haven't done it. I'm going to say it in Spanish just in case right now. Para los que quisieran ver la presentación en español, lo vamos a tener disponible en esta sesión. Les debe aparecer un menú donde puedan escoger entre Spanish o English. Cuando presionen en español, me van a dejar de oír a mí y van a escuchar a mi compañera Selene en español, pero es la misma presentación, ¿ok? Gracias. All right, thank you guys. All right, so the first part of this session, we're going to talk about classification standards and types of costs. All right, so the Code of Federal Regulations actually establishes that there are standards for costs that you must follow. They are specifically detailed in what is the 2 CFR, which is the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 200 under Uniform Administrative Requirements, Cost Principle, and Audit Requirements for Federal Awards, okay? Of these standard costs, what we like to say the most important one is the first one that is listed here, which is allowable. Okay, costs have to be allowable. Before you charge anything, make sure that your cost is allowable. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult to assess whether a cost is allowable or not because there are so many different type of programs, right? And then there could be times when a cost is allowable under one program, but not necessarily under another. When in doubt, look at the solicitation, refer to the Code of Federal Regulations, okay, the 2 CFR, and any other details that you might have about the budget, about the request. Okay, if you still can't find the answer, then talk to your program manager. Okay. They should know what is allowable and what isn't. And then if there is a need for you to make a case that there is something, that may not have been approved before, but that it is entirely necessary for your program, then, bring your documentation and try to justify it, okay? The second part says that it is necessary to the performance of a project. Yes. This sort of goes back to what I just said. They need to serve the goal, okay, of what the purpose of the program is, okay. The third one says it has to be reasonable. Okay, so we sort of give an example here of, let's say that your organization operates out of a building, right, and there are utilities expenses for this building, specifically, let's say water. It is not reasonable for you to charge the utilities for the whole building to your program if you're only operating out of, let's say, 1 floor, okay, or maybe 2 floors out of 10, okay. What we're trying to say here is that yes, your organization is assuming these costs, but the fair share of what is going to be assumed by your program has to be assessed, okay? It has to be reasonable. Number 4 says allocable to the project and consistently treated. Okay, when we talk about allocable, we mean that they are assignable and that they can be easily traced back to the source, okay? For example, the portion of the salary of a grant manager distributed to a specific program or grant, okay? And then the second part of this says consistently treated. What we mean by this is that if a cost is assigned as direct, it has to be treated as direct for the rest of the program. And you cannot start sort of switching back and forth between these classifications. And we're going to talk about direct and indirect classification in a little bit, okay? Number 5, non-profitable. Okay, so none of these programs are for profit. You should not be making any profit out of these, okay? Grant programs are intended to serve a need that is not met because, there's lack of funding within your organization or, in your area, okay? It is a pure service. We're not here for profit. Don't do it. Next one is claimed against only one award. Yes. Don't claim your costs to more than one award. Remember, it has to be for one specifically, and it has to be traced back to that. Okay. And then finally, it has to be permissible under state and federal laws and regulations. Yes. If it's illegal, at the state level or at the federal level, it's no good. Okay. All right. So, like I said, we're going to cover the classification of costs. Specifically, we're going to start with direct costs. Okay. They can be either direct or indirect. And when we talk about direct, we say that these costs can be identified specifically with an activity. Okay, for example, if you have a grant manager that works on one specific grant or two specific grants, okay, it can be sort of traced back to it. Okay, an example of this is salaries and wages. This includes holiday, sick leave for direct employees, okay? It also includes fringe benefits that are traceable back to these specific direct labor employees, okay? We have to say that it could be, depending on how you present it in your budget, that these fringe benefits can be sort of accrued in an indirect manner, okay? So you have to be very clear when you write your budget. And then if you decide that the fringe benefits are going to be treated as indirectly, remember what we talked about in the first slide, that you have to be consistent throughout your program, okay? Consultant services contracted to accomplish specific project objectives, okay? Again, it's specifically attributable to a consultant, okay? Travel or direct labor employees, again, that is a direct cost. And then materials and supplies purchased directly for use on a specific project. Okay, materials and supplies could be, just like fringe benefits, could be treated as indirect. And this happens when it just becomes too cumbersome to actually try and trace. Let's say a supply back, for example, a staple or a pen or a Post-it. It's just not worth it. Okay, so we include it under an indirect cost. This list is not exhaustive. You can have many other direct costs, but like we said, they are specific to a portion of the program. Okay, and easily identifiable and traceable. All right, classification of costs. Okay, so when we are looking at classification of costs for grant, we are talking about the specific budget categories of your program that should be identified within your accounting system. Okay, that should sort of match with what you presented in the budget, and they should be in your accounting system. Why? We should be able to charge these and keep track of what was actually charged to the program. If we don't have the same account consistency within the accounts, we're not going to be able to do that. Okay. If you look at this slide in the far right corner, you can see that because we're tracking adequately, we are seeing some variances. Okay. There, I wouldn't say 100%, but it's going to be almost for sure that you're going to have variances between what you actually expensed and what you budgeted. Okay, so it's very important that we keep track of these variances. Why? If we have a surplus, like for example, in direct labor here, that says we have 4,420 in a positive in a surplus. We need to reallocate these funds to another budget category. If not, these funds are going to have to come back to the federal agency that gave you the money, right? The funds. And we don't want this, okay? At DOJ, at OJP, we want you to use all the money, okay? So keep track of it so that you have enough time to reallocate if necessary. All right. All right. So costs can also be classified as indirect. These are costs that have a benefit to the program, but are hard or difficult to measure or quantify, and that they are not as easily identifiable or traceable back to the program. Okay. Some of these can be maintenance of buildings, telephone expense, matching, trying to keep track of every minute, that your employees, used during the program to try and trace that back to. No, that's not plausible, right? Supplies. I gave an example a little bit earlier. Staples. What else did I say? Post-its, et cetera, et cetera. That is way too much work to try and trace that back to the program. Just group it in a major category and use it as an indirect cost. Depreciation and then rental expense. Again, this list as one indirect cost in the direct costs slide is not exhaustive. There are many other types of indirect costs you can include here. Okay. If in doubt, always contact your project manager, or hey, contact us at TFSC. We'll be glad to help you out too. All right. So for indirect costs, we use what are called indirect cost rates. Okay. And these are three of the types of rates we use. The first one is a provisional indirect cost rate adjusted to actual retroactive adjustment. Okay. So like the word says, it's a provisional rate while you negotiate what is going to be your final negotiated rate. Okay. The thing about this provisional rate, it is that it is going to be applied retroactively. Okay. If there is a deficit, it will have to come back out of another budget category. And if you went over, then your organization may be asked to cover this difference. Okay, so we don't like to use provisional rates. We like to get to the final negotiated rate that you're going to use, but there are cases where that may take a little bit of time, and can use your provisional rate for usually no more than 2 years. Okay. All right. Then it says predetermined rates, not normally subject to adjustment. Okay. If historically in your organization, your indirect rates don't fluctuate too much, let's just say it's pretty consistently 12% of your direct cost, then you can reach an agreement for a predetermined rate and not have it applied retroactively. But then again, This is if your indirect cost rate doesn't fluctuate too much, okay? Next one, it says fixed rates with roll or carry forward adjustment in future period. Okay, in most cases, this sort of works itself out because it's sort of carried forward, okay? And any adjustments for increments or decreases can be done in future periods, okay? And then implement the cognizant federal agency concept. Okay, what we're trying to say here is that, let's put it this way, whatever federal agency provides you with the most federal dollars or funds, that is the one that is going to be responsible to review and negotiate your indirect cost rates, okay? They're sort of going to take the lead on that, okay? So when we're looking at costs, like we said, there are two different types. They should be broken up in your general ledger, okay? In your cost ledger, they should be broken up into direct and indirect separately. Do not mix them. And then within the direct and indirect categories, you should have specific accounting codes for each type of cost or expense, okay? In this example, we see that labor starts with 5,000 and it goes all the way up to 5,199, where then travel starts at 5,200, okay? You don't have to use these specific numbers. You can use whichever you want, but they do have to be sort of consistent, and they do have to be organized separately for each category, okay? All right, classification of costs, the de minimis rate. The de minimis rate is one of the rates we can use for indirect costs, okay? Any non-federal entity that has never received, that's important, never received a negotiated indirect cost rate, in other words, first time you're a rookie, you can elect to charge a de minimis rate of 10% of your modified total direct cost, okay? So the de minimis rate was implemented because it was believed that many organizations were not applying for indirect cost funding because of the amounts and the calculations that they had to do for indirect cost rates. So this is sort of a way to simplify the process for you, not having to sort of get someone to do all the analysis and all the calculations to see what indirect cost rate more benefits you. So you can just go ahead and say, you know what, I'm just going to go with a standard 10% rate across the board, and that's it, okay? This, the minimis rate, remember, it can be used indefinitely until you try and actually negotiate a rate. If you don't want to negotiate a rate, keep using your de minimis rate of 10%, okay? Usually these negotiated rates are seeked. We wanna look for them when we realize that a real indirect cost rate is higher than 10%, okay? So if you're 15, 18, 20% indirect cost rate, it is not in your best interest to just keep using 10, okay? Try and negotiate for a higher one to cover those actual real costs, okay? Bullet number 3 says costs must be consistently charged as either indirect or direct, not both. I think I mentioned this in another slide. Once you assign something as direct or indirect, be consistent throughout the program, okay? And then last says subrecipients use the same guidelines as recipient. Yes. If you, as a grantee, use the de minimis rate, your subrecipient can also use that de minimis rate, Okay, it used to be before that they could only use a negotiated rate if you had one. Now they can also use the de minimis rate. All right, and the Code of Federal Regulation Standards of Costs. The CFR does not, again, very important, does not, one, supersede limitation imposed by law. We will not ever go above and beyond any state or federal law, okay? We do not dictate the extent of federal funds, okay? We will not provide, it does not provide additional federal funds for indirect costs. Yes. Going back to indirect cost rates, it's important that you take some time to analyze what your real indirect costs are, because you're not going to be able to cover these with additional funds. Okay, just for that. Okay, can't do it. The regulation does not dictate how government should use funds. Okay, and then lastly, the regulation does not relieve state and local governments of stewardship responsibilities for federal funds. All right, selective items of cost. Okay, so these are sort of gray area, tricky costs. Okay, we're gonna go by a few of them. Again, this list is not exhaustive. There could be others in here, but these are the most common. Okay, the first one is accounting. So when we say accounting, we're talking about the person that is keeping track of salaries and costs. These people are usually charged as indirect, but they also could be charged as direct. Again, consistency. Advertising. This is a great area, but there are basically just main three ways that advertising are allowable under federal programs. The first one is to get people to work on your program. Okay, sort of let people know about your program and sort of lure them in, right? The second one is if you need to purchase on goods or services. So for procurement, you can incur in advertising costs. And then finally, if there's equipment that you need to dispose of, then you can, get the word out and advertise for it. Number 3 says alcoholic beverages. This is an almost never. The only rare case we've come across that alcoholic beverages could be charged to a program is that we're studying the effects, or there is an active investigation on the effects of alcoholic beverages. Okay, so it's if it's an investigation, it could be. Then 99.9% of other cases, no, it's not allowable. Okay. Next one says audit services. Okay, remember that DOJ requires that if you have funding above $750,000 within your fiscal year from federal funds, you have to undergo an audit. So if you comply with that threshold and you have audit expenses, there are some that you could charge to the program. Okay. Bad debts. That's 100% never. No. Contingencies. This is in sort of like alcohol beverages. Almost never. The rare case that we've come across is construction. In construction, there are changes that you sort of had to make along the way, and they're contingent to whatever we come across. So almost never, very rare is it allowable. Okay. Contributions and donations. Never, ever with federal money. No. Okay. We have entertainment. well, it depends on the nature, sort of like with alcohol. There are juvenile programs that take youth to, let's say, sporting events, a football game, or maybe they take them out to a movie. That's entertainment, and that can be charged to a program. But again, it's sort of the nature of the program. Okay. Fines and penalties, never. Fundraising, never. Okay. Rental costs. If, let's say, your organization is working out of the building that you own, you cannot charge rent to the program. Okay. Something that you maybe could charge is maintenance, because there's a need for maintaining your facilities, and then that is traceable to the program, and it could be charged. Okay. And then lastly, under recovery of cost under federal grants. Oh yes, you can't never ever try and cover costs or deficits from one program with funds from another. Okay, that is never allowed. All right, so now we're going to talk about what an allowable cost is in sort of general term. Okay, an allowable costs is one that is necessary, reasonable, and allocable. Those are the three sort of big pillars when trying to determine if the cost is allowable or not. Remember, necessary for the program. If I don't have it, my program is not going to be able to run well. Okay, it has to be reasonable. I think I gave an example of the utilities for the whole building cannot be charged to the program that operates out of one floor now. And then allocable just means that they're easily sort of put into buckets and traceable, okay, and distributable, okay, and that they're not prohibited under state or local laws and regulations. If it's illegal, they're not allowable, okay. And then costs must conform to any limitations set forth in federal laws and comply with the terms and conditions of the federal award and claimed against only one award. Okay, I think we've covered that in previous slide. All right, unallowable costs. Okay, so unallowable costs are ones that are not allowed under federal program under any circumstances. These are some of the most common ones, just like in other slides. This is not an exhaustive list, okay? But the most common ones that we see are lobbying, land acquisition, fundraising, entertainment. Careful. We talked about entertainment when it's within the nature of the program. It could be, okay? Contingency, same thing. Generally not. But I think I gave an example of, I think it was construction. It could be, again, nature of the program, but usually not. And then alcoholic beverages, same thing. Maybe it's an investigation, okay, nature of the program. But in general terms, they're unallowed, okay? All right, unauthorized cost. Okay, so unauthorized costs are when there's no consent from the awarding agency to incur costs not included in the approved budget or that occur before or after the grant award period. I think the key takeaway from this is that they were not in your budget, okay? They were never approved, so they were never authorized, okay? This usually comes up when we are trying to sort of move funds within budget categories and then want to include a category that was $0, okay, that is new to the budget. Then be careful, because that is an unauthorized cost. You have to go back to your program manager and get it authorized, okay? All right, this is This is another big topic. Unsupported costs. These are costs that do not contain adequate documentation to support work performed or costs charged to the federal award. Okay, remember that all of your costs have to be justifiable, okay, and justify them with supporting documentation. Okay, so don't just charge to charge. Keep your files in order, and in your accounting in order, and your books in order. Okay. Next slide, please. All right, and then we have unreasonable cost. These are those that are deemed excessive or unreasonable when its nature and amount exceeds that which would be incurred by a prudent person when the decision was made. We sort of like to say here, if you wouldn't do it with your own personal money, then it's probably unreasonable. Okay. All right. So that concludes my part. I'm going to leave you with Francis Mendez for the learning activity.
Thank you, Zarel. Now we're going to do a learning activity around the type of cost and classification. So we're going to do a series of polls. Okay. So the first poll is going to be, you noted expenditures in the amount of $456 for the purchase of a new desk for Ms. Taylor to replace her old desk, which was damaged by a water leak last year. What type of cost is this? So would you say the replacement of the new desk because the one was damaged by water leak, is that an allowable or unallowable cost? Okay, I think all right, so the majority of folks said it was an allowable cost. This is actually an unallowable cost. In order for it to be allowable, the purchase has to be for the grant program. Replacing a desk because it was damaged by water is not related to the grant program, so then it would be unallowable. So 41% of those got that question right. Okay, let's go to the next question. Since the inception of the grant, you noticed that the grantee charged their employees $18,000 in fringe benefits related to retirement, Social Security, health insurance, and overtime. What type of cost is this? Are these fringe benefits that were listed allowable or unallowable? Okay, let's do the poll question. Yep, it is an allowable expense. Fringe benefits are allowable, which is generally with respect to overtime, as long as that's allowable under your grant conditions, that's fine. Executives are limited from being reimbursed for overtime. And just remember that if you have someone that is not full-time on the grant, you have to prorate the fringe benefits. Okay, let's go to the next question. You reviewed several airline receipts from Southwest for approved travel to the crime lab in North Carolina. You noticed that the grantee purchased early check-in, which totaled $70. The grantee's reason for early check-in was to obtain a better seat on the plane. What type of cost is this? Is this an allowable or unallowable cost? All right, wonderful. Everybody got this one right. Yes, it's an unallowable cost. This was an upgrade. Upgrades are not allowed. All right, let's go to the next question. The next quiz question is, you want to provide an honorarium to a speaker as a symbolic gesture of respect, esteem, and admiration. Would you say this cost is allowable or unallowable? All right. Yeah, so the majority of you said it's unallowable. If in order for it to be allowable, for example, it would be okay if you were paying them for services rendered in terms of a speaking fee, but just to honor them, for admire them, that's not an allowable cost. Right. Let's go to the next question. So you want to provide dual compensation to an employee, which includes salary from your organization and from an award to cover hours worked from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. This employee's work benefits both activities. Is this cost allowable or unallowable? Okay. Yeah, so it is unallowable. You cannot charge the government and your organization for the same amount of work. You can't double dip. So that's unallowable. Let's go to the next question. A grantee provided their travel voucher for an annual meeting at the International Association of Identification in Richmond, Virginia. The hotel receipt was $375 plus tax, which is $125 per night. The GSA lodging per diem for Richmond, Virginia is $96 per day. However, the grantee did not check the rate prior to booking their hotel. The grantee was informed that their expense was an unreasonable cost. All right, so can folks let us know why is this cost unreasonable? And you can actually put this in the chat, right? And then the next question, what should the grantee do next time they're traveling? So let's look at the chat. So why do folks think this cost was unreasonable? That's right. Thank you, Kimberly. So the GSA has lodging and per diem rates for different locations. And as you can see, the lodging cost was significantly higher than the lodging rate, right? The GSA lodging rate. Now, what should the grantee do next time they're booking travel? Yes, thank you, Tara. They should check the GSA lodging rates prior to booking the travel so they're able to know if the rates are reasonable. And then, when you're booking a hotel, you can ask the hotel if they honor the GSA government rates, right? Because some hotels do. All right. Thank you, everyone, for your participation. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Carlin, who's going to talk about preventing fraud, waste, and abuse.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I hope you all are enjoying this presentation. I'm excited to present to you all fraud, waste, and abuse. So the U.S. government awards billions annually in federal assistance in the form of grants to help organizations like yourself. So with that in mind, it's important that you understand your responsibility in handling these funds. In fact, you have an obligation to handle the funds properly. And as a second bullet states, the DOJ expects the funds to be used only for the intended purposes and within the established guidelines. Therefore, we must rely on you to do your part in preventing fraud, waste, abuse, or mismanagement. The grant process is an integrity-based system. So we depend on you to act with honesty in using grant funds and in reporting on the use of these funds. So one thing to remember is the newspaper test. Well, before that, if you are unsure about something, you want to talk to your assigned program manager, but always keep this in the back of your mind. How would you feel about any given action if you knew it was to be written up in your local newspaper or broadcasted on a local news channel? So at the very beginning, employ an integrity-based system from top to bottom in your organization. By doing that, you have a greater chance of avoiding an embarrassing moment. Now we will go over what fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement means. So fraud, examples of fraud would include embezzlement, misappropriating funds for personal purposes, forgery. When we look at waste, we think of spending that is not supported by adequate documentation or purchasing unneeded equipment, buying supplies to spend the budget, and inadequate monitoring of credit card use. When we look at abuse, we think about an abuse of a job position, rank or assigning authority, misusing vehicles, company computers, tools, and all equipment for personal benefit. And lastly, mismanagement. We think about stockpiling equipment beyond its shelf life or renewing a contract for support that is no longer needed. Now, we are going to briefly cover two types of fraud. That will be conflict of interest and failure to properly support use of award funds. I mean, we know what theft is, so we'll focus more on the other two. As a grantee, you are required to use funds in the best interest of your program. Decisions about these use of these funds must be free of any undisclosed personal or organizational conflicts of interest, both in appearance and in fact. Also, you want to avoid using family members or good friends to conduct businesses with. When in doubt, just don't do it. Also, sub-grant award decisions should be fair and transparent. Most procurement require full and open competition. And lastly, I can't stress this enough. If you have sub-recipients, make sure you monitor them. They are your responsibility. And for additional guidance on that, you can look at 2 CFR 200, 330 through 332. And lastly, if you plan to use consultants, just be mindful to use a fair selection process, reasonable pay rates, and specific work products. So this includes, this includes redirecting the funds differently as outlined in your grant agreement. You may have the ability to revise your budget up to 10% if your grant is under 150,000, but you want to verify this with your grant manager and your special conditions. Also, not accounting for items outlined in the budget categories like personnel costs, contracts, indirect cost rates, etc. It is important to keep track of these items with effective internal controls policies and procedures. These should always leave a paper trail. And lastly, just be honest, never provide false or misleading information on progress or financial reports. So the awarding agency is here to support you from start to finish. So utilize their expertise if you have any concerns and are not sure about something. Fraud indicators. So indicators of fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement of federal funds can be due to a variety of causes and are rarely a simple black and white issue. We must follow up on all such concerns to determine what is really happening. We're not perfect and mistakes sometimes happen. I mean, we get that. But it is important that we address the mistakes immediately so that it doesn't escalate to gross negligence and ultimately criminal fraud. We need your help, and we expect you as the recipient to always be on alert for possible fraud. So here are some things to look out for. So for example, employee behavior. Are they living beyond their means? Do they have financial issues? Did you notice that they have close ties to certain vendors? Are they cutting corners and showing signs of any unethical behavior? Also, you want to be mindful of your work environment and pay close attention to any suspicious behavior, communication, or performance. Now, how do we reduce the risk of fraudulent use? So let's remember the 3 E's: examine, educate, and ensure. You should make it a habit to examine internal controls to identify vulnerabilities. Next, you always want to educate staff about the possibility of fraud, what to look for, and how to prevent it. Next, you want to ensure all documents are accurate and ensure whatever you do or purchase, there is documentation to support that action. And finally, as I stated earlier, identify and avoid any potential conflict of interest issues and follow a fair and transparent procurement process. You have a duty to report fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement. So if you suspect anything, contact your program manager as soon as possible. If you need additional help, please use the phone number and email address that's listed on the slide. Now, we want to avoid this at all costs. However, if a recipient is found guilty of fraud, waste, abuse, or mismanagement, here are some of the consequences. One, they could be banned from receiving future federal funding. Next is responsible for the administrative recoveries of the funds. You can have a civil lawsuit or criminal prosecution brought against them. And then lastly, what I say at the beginning, just remember the newspaper test. If you think of doing something and you know it can cause embarrassment to yourself, to your organization, just don't do it. And here are some resources that you can refer to regarding fraud, waste, or abuse. Again, if you have any questions, please you reach out to your program specialist. The job aid on here that's listed, we have a job aid on our website. Abroad fraud, waste, abuse is a very good, valuable tool that you can refer to if you have any concerns about fraud, waste, or abuse. And that concludes my presentation. Sorry.
Concluye mi presentación.
Okay, now we will turn it over to Celine with the learning activity.
I'm sorry, I'm not able to.
We can hear you, Celine.
You can hear me? Oh, okay.
Yep.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, I thought you weren't hearing me. So now we're gonna do an exercise, and we're gonna have some cases. And here we have a possible background, which an individual was tasked with purchasing equipment using. I'm sorry, did you hear me? I apologize.
Hola,
Oh,
se le puedo escuchar.
Miss.
Celine, we can hear you now. You were on mute for a little bit.
Oh, okay, I apologize.
We can hear you now. Yep.
Oh, okay. So we're gonna present this. I apologize. The system is muting me. When I start speaking, the system immediately mutes me. It says that the host is muting me.
Okay. I show it. Hey, Carlin, can you help me out?
Yeah.
We'll help us, Selena. So, Selena, you can go ahead and we'll take over here. Yep. And again, apologies for the tech issues today. But Carlin, why don't we walk through this and I'll handle the poll questions too.
Okay. So the background is an individual was tasked with purchasing equipment using a federal award. The possible abuse indicator, circumvention of the established procurement process, and vendor complaints. The scheme identified individuals stole over $100,000 by directed contracts to bogus companies that he established. What type of misuse of funds was committed?
Take a few moments to enter your response in the poll, and then Carlin will share the correct answer here in a few moments. Okay.
All right. And the 21 out of 21, wow, you got it. The answer is fraudulent activities on a grant-funded project. So the individual fraudulently created bogus companies to steal federal funds. So good job. All right. Okay, the background. A program manager purchased laptop and printer sets at LMX Tech at a price that was $650 more than for the same model at computer company. Possible abuse indicator. Funds should not be used to purchase overpriced equipment due to vendor preferences. So what type of misuse of funds was committed here?
Take a few moments. Thank you for your responses.
You guys are doing really, really well.
Okay, we'll close the poll.
All right. Okay, 38. Oh, this is a tie, but the correct answer is waste. So the answer would be A. So waste of funds as the PM purchased a more expensive laptop and printer than he could have gotten for a cheaper amount. But it could also, I mean,
Así
technically,
que la contestación correcta es gas.
could be mismanagement of grant funds as well, because it is mismanagement, but it also falls into the line of waste. So there's no really, so that if you pick waste of mismanagement grant funds, technically you are correct.
Yep. And Carlin, can you walk through what was the result of this? It's
sorry. I'm sorry. I haven't.
Oh no, the result. I just animated it.
Oh, sorry.
Yep.
The recipient repaid funds as the agency deemed the $18,500 excessive for the grant employee. So if you end up wasting funds, and is found out about, then you may have to repay those funds, which it only hurts again, it hurts what you're trying to do with the grant funds initially. So just make sure that you want to find the least expensive option. I didn't say cheapest, because there's a difference if sometimes you get what you pay for, but if you can focus on the least expensive option for the same product, then I think you'll be fine.
Yep. We have two more of these. So good job so far, everyone. Here we go.
All right. A recipient received funds for a school safety summer program for middle and high school students. Possible abuse indicator, contract for a 12-month lease, spoiled food due to excessive purchase of perishable items, and insufficient documentation to support a substantial number of purchases. What type of misuse of funds was committed here?
Take a few moments for the response. Thank you, everyone.
Mm-hmm.
After we share the results and the right answer, Carlin will talk about the result. What happened as a result of this? So here we go. I'll close it, and here are the results.
All right, and the majority of you got the answer correctly. It is mismanagement of grant funds. So basically, just to talk about this, why sign a 12-month lease initially if it was only a summer program, which is 2 to 3 months? And then purchasing excessive food that can spoil is another example of mismanagement of funds. And then lastly, no documentation or insufficient documentation. You should always have sufficient documentation to justify what your actions are. And it was a result. The recipient paid the federal government over $300,000 to settle a civil fraud allegations. Wow.
All right, we have one more of these. And again, thank you, everyone.
Okay, the background. Tablets were purchased for program staff to have access while monitoring after-school programs. And then a possible abuse indicator. Monitoring has not occurred during the life of the project while tablets are filled with game applications, personal documents, videos, and music. What type of misuse of funds was committed here?
Take a few moments here. All right. I'll go ahead and close the poll here in a second. And here are the results.
Gotcha. And the answer is B, abuse. So if you answered abuse, 61% is correct. Tablets, I mean, it's an allowable cost, but if you're using it to fill with video games and music and personal documents, then you are abusing what it was intended for. And the result, Russ? recipient repaid the federal government for the purchase of the 15 tablets. So again, just be mindful of the things that you have and to try to, anything purchased with government funds should not be used for personal reasons.
All right, and this is Russ, and again, thank you for your participation.
All right. So now we're going to open it up to overall Q&A and discussion on what we had great presentations on classifications of standards of types of costs, and then also fraud, waste, and abuse. So we're going to open it up, the floor, to have some discussion. If you have any questions you want to ask, put it in the chat or unmute yourself to ask.
The first question with the desk, purchasing the desk because the one desk had been ruined by water damage. That was considered an unallowable expense. I'm sorry, can you explain why that's unallowable?
Hey, Zarel, can you chime in on that one?
One more time? Yeah.
No, yeah, Zarel?
This is Francis. I could take that one. So the purchase of furniture under grant has to be for a program purpose. So in this scenario, they were buying a new desk because the old one got damaged by a water leak last year. So if you're purchasing furniture for a grant program and it's in the budget and it's for the purposes and use of the grant, that's allowable. But if you're using grant funds to kind of replace damaged equipment from a year ago and it's not related to the program, then that would be considered unallowable. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks, Francis, for taking that one. I couldn't unmute myself. But yeah, what Francis said is 100% correct.
Now we talked about a couple of times documentation. Well, I have a question. What could be some examples of insufficient documentation that could lead to an allowable cost being unallowable, and in turn could cause fraud, waste, or abuse? So you have an allowable cost, and what type of insufficient documentation, let's say you were being audited, what type of insufficient documentation that could lead that cost to being unallowable? So one answer could be a missing receipt, or receipt that does not have enough detail to justify that cost. So again, it's imperative that you keep all your receipts for things that you purchase, and that the receipts or the documentation, the purchase orders, have all the sufficient and necessary information on there to justify that cost. And there's a question from Kimberly. Wouldn't replacement of the desk be allowable if furniture for staff is budgeted and approved?
Yes, Kimberly, you are correct. The angle of the question was sort of directed to sort of say, you can't use your program funds to sort of replenish your equipment and everything that you have in your organization just because. Okay, if you need a desk that someone is going to use when working for that program, then fine. And of course, it has to be a budgeted and approved. So yes, it would be allowable in that case.
Great question. Now, another question for the group, and hopefully there's a recipient that can chime in. We're just curious to know that what processes or policies do you have in place to monitor for compliance, and how do you safeguard your assets for your property and things like that. So just to what measures are you taking in place to prevent fraud, waste, or abuse from occurring? Do you have any type of internal control policies, procedures in place, iron out for various things such as, spending or personnel decisions or procurement? Like, if any examples that you can provide, we would love for you to share at this point regarding, what type of processes do you have in place to monitor for compliance to prevent fraud from occurring? Okay, I see property, physical inventory process. That's great. Thank you, Kimberly, for sharing that. And inventory is person. I mean, that's great. I mean, there's certain criteria or data elements that, for your inventory that you should have on that property, so that in the event of an audit or a site visit, if the specialist comes aboard and wants to see the property and, want to make sure it's tagged correctly, that goes a long way just to ensure that, one, the piece of equipment does not get lost. And then two, that, all the information on that equipment is listed on that tag. And then, okay, Amber said staff submits purchase orders or check requests to be approved by CEO, and that's great, and it's signed off by staff accounting. That's an excellent policy. For purchasing items. You have two different people reviewing and signing off on it, so that's great. There's a segregation of duties there. It's that's another great example. Anybody else? Okay. Well, thank you all for participating. Thank you all for those that put items in the chat. It's very informative. And now we will turn over to Francis for the next steps. Take it away, Francis.
Thank you, Carlin. Just as a reminder, in the learning management system, you're able to review schedules there, access the learning materials for the next session, for the session we just covered, for prior sessions. Make sure you're completing the knowledge checks after each session. And the LMS also allows you to kind of keep track of what progress you're making, and you will receive your certification through LMS, and you're also able to access frequently asked questions. This is a reminder, in the LMS, for each module, you're going to find different resources such as fact sheets, guide sheets, infographics, job aid checklists, and short videos. If you have any challenges accessing the FMS, feel free to contact us. As I mentioned, after each session or each module, there's a knowledge check that consists of 12 multiple choice questions that's based on the resources you've reviewed and the live session content. In order to pass the knowledge check, you have to get 9 out of the 12 questions right, so a 75% passing rate. And the knowledge checks are in the LMS. All right. So to email the Territories Financial Support Center for a consultation, or if you have a question, you can see the email there. We will respond to you within 24 hours or next business day if it's on the end of the weekend. And if you have specific questions for OCFO, you can contact the customer service center at the email listed. If you want to learn more about the Office of Justice Program Territories Financial Support Center, you can go to our website by clicking on that link. And if you want to be kept up to date on events and news, you can also subscribe to our listserv. Okay, so this is a reminder. The next session is going to be on Thursday, February 23rd. As we mentioned before, the schedule was updated. So you would have to go in manually and delete the old calendar invites. You should have gotten an email that has the updated calendar invite, so that the next session is on Thursday instead of Monday, and then the next session after that is next week, Monday. And at the next session, we're going to cover procurement and subrecipient monitoring. I want to thank everyone for their participation and for attending, and for the great discussion. Hope everyone has a great morning, afternoon, and thank you, everyone.